great songs, and thank you. I thought I was wearing my lapel. All right, let's take our Bibles, if you will. We're going to turn to the book of Zechariah, chapter number 7. Brother Scott, I'll turn this on in just a moment, as soon as I can unwind this thing. Zechariah, chapter number 7, and continuing our study on the book of Zechariah. This is a very long study. We've been 3 years now in the Kings and the Kingdom. We started all the way back in 1 Samuel, and so we've been at it going through the life. Turn it on. Okay, is that better? Okay, great. All right, all those things, ceremony without power. That's what the issue is. That's what the message is about tonight. So, anyways, started all the way back in Saul, and we've been going through the existence, if you will, of the nation of Israel in the Old Testament. We have arrived to an area where it's past the time of exile, and so the prophets that we're going through right now are called the post-exilic prophets, because it's post or after the exile. That's why they call it the post-exilic prophets. And what's happening is, of course, they're doing the work that they're supposed to be with some kind of limitations, some kind of obstruction in how they're getting that done. And so what's happened in the meantime is God had to send some encouragement, some nudging, and basically some people to yell at them. And so you have two forms of it. You have you have Zechariah, who honestly is not incredibly harsh about how he does, and then there's Haggai, and that's a little more harsh. So anyways, very, very straightforward. So looking at this, we're in Zechariah chapter 7, which opens it up to a new section then in the book of Zechariah. Now, Zechariah is split primarily, I think you break it up into, three major sections, and you'd have the first portion, which is the first 6 chapters, which are the 8 visions. And so there's 8 visions that are given. And then chapter 7 and 8 is going to be a kind of a middle portion before we finish off lengthier part. And this is the messages. These are very, there's no ambiguity about what he's talking about. He's just going to be very direct. And so the prophecies have been given, and we have to remember that Zechariah is not speaking in the abstract or only in the long-term spiritual application. Most of the time, and I'll be honest, I'm guessing that in the times past when I've preached this, in fact, I know it's got to be the case, is that I've preached this in the abstract, in the sense of like our spiritual walk. And the realities are true. I mean, I've heard a lot of messages on it, for instance, not by power, but by my spirit, saith the Lord. That's very obvious what he's talking about. The whole point of doing the work of the Lord by the Spirit of God. But most of the time, that type of message is taken out of this, and then we forget why it's in there. And so the big question is why. So my goal on this has been to study what he's talking about, and then we go to the conclusion. So God gives us conclusions that are very obvious. In fact, a lot of the prophecies, especially when you get to chapter number 6, and they put the crowns on Joshua, and they look forward to the coming Messiah, and they're talking about him, that he's standing in for something that's going to happen in the future, talking about the Gentiles that are going to be brought in, those that were far off. What he's pointing out here is this is the visions, the prophecies, application. So this is how we know what it means. Now, the big thing about that is when you look at those visions, they're like, I'm not really sure what a lot of those things mean. And back then, I'd imagine they really weren't sure what a lot of those things mean, because many of them had not come to pass at all. But what he tells you is this is the very clear application. So God is always very clear about application, which is an important point for us, isn't it? Because I think a lot of times prophecy, we will, there are big debates on the point of prophecy that really don't get a lot of attention, because generally we kind of abide within our own circles of prophecy. And what I mean by that is we believe in the millennium. Well, like that's, I'd imagine, I hope everybody in this room agrees about that there's going to be a millennial kingdom. That's a coming kingdom, right? Amen. So we believe that. But there on the greater scope of arguments and fighting and stuff like that, people are arguing right now, is there going to be a coming kingdom? And there's a lot of thought. And to be honest, this is kind of a depressing thought as I've tried to figure this out theologically, but then practically. What if there is no coming kingdom? What if Jesus isn't coming? Which, trying to understand the Bible and remove that important concept is really difficult, to be honest with you, because then everything else just doesn't really kind of make sense. Because, ultimately, he'd have to, take over heaven. Ultimately, I think it's just, right? That's the application. That's kind of what would happen if there's no coming kingdom. Then he's going to have to come beat up somebody in heaven, is what people are trying to explain. And none of that's true. Or it all just already took place, which means, boy, the kingdom that was promised was going to be a lot different than what he promised. And so then it sounds like a lot of the other people that are making prophecies about random stuff that's going to occur in a certain year. My dad is a Jehovah's Witness, and they believed and they preached all throughout the 1900s that Jesus was going to come back on several occasions in the 80s and the 90s and then early 2000s, and they just kept on reworking it, and eventually they just kind of took that out of their prophecy, like, oh, we never really meant that. So I remember telling my dad, I said, well, I know this about Jehovah's Witnesses, that if they give a prophecy like this and it doesn't come to pass, the Bible makes it very clear what you do with that kind of prophet. And I know I don't have the jurisdiction to do that, but it's enough for me to say I can't listen to anything you're talking about because your prophecies are wrong. And so anyways, with this, really, we're still, what we're wrong about, and it's possible. I've gone through several things that I've told you. I'm like, well, I'm pretty sure this is what it means. And if I'm wrong, I know what the practical application was. And so what we saw at the end of chapter 6 was he's coming again. He's going to establish his kingdom. He is going to be priest and king combined. All that's going to work together. And so we know this is what's coming. Now with this, we are wrong within the context of what we absolutely know is right. And so we might have some details that we're off, but I hope that we can be united around those things. In chapter number 7 and 8, he's going to give us some very clear, like, this isn't even prophecy necessarily. This is God just explaining some things and how certain things work. And so there's much to be unified about because he's going to be very, very direct. And I love that because a lot of times I look at prophecy and I'm like, God, I don't know what you're saying. And I'm encouraged because Zechariah says, I don't know what you're saying. And so he gives them that information throughout it. But then in chapter 7, he just clears up a lot of information, all right? So I debated a lot on whether or not we should take chapter 7 and 8 as one message. And I'm not going to do that. So I'm not 100% sure how I'm going to take chapter number 8 yet, but just pray for me in preparation for that. There's a lot of information in chapter number 8, so that's why the debate. Now, chapter 7, if we're going to start in verse number 1. Verse number 1, it says, and it came to pass in the 4th year of King Darius that the word of the Lord came unto Zechariah in the 4th month of the 9th month in even Chislu, when they had sent unto the house of God Cherez and I practiced this like you did, brother. I had it over there, or I had it earlier. All right. Regemelech and their men to pray before the Lord. Now, if you're wondering about those names, those are not normal Jewish names. Those are Chaldean names or Babylonian names, which points us to a little bit about where they came from. If they received those names, and they have Babylonian names, and it kind of points to where they're from. For instance, my last name is Mejia, which most of you know that. Some people still wonder. Brother Gleiser, on the letter, if you might see it later, it's spelled, how is it spelled? It's creative. A lot more vowels than I've got, I think. It's the same number of vowels. Okay, so it's Meiji, all right? So you just kind of, like, these are approximately the letters in there. And so they're in there, all right? Brother Eric was witnessing to somebody, and he had fun with the name. He just started putting all sorts of consonants and vowels in there randomly. But I think you started with the right letter and ended, and so I think it was close enough. And so, what's that? It ended. And so anyways, now with that, the reason my last name Mejia is actually, and this is not because of like some special ordaining of God, but literally it's from the Hebrew word that we would get Messiah from, or chosen one. And so what's said is it's a transliteration of a Jewish word or Hebrew word into Spanish, which is Mejia. So that's, now I don't have a Jewish last name. That means I have a Spanish last name, right? That's the idea. Now this would have been similar. So these were Jews that were in Babylon, hence they got Babylonian names, is the concept of where it came from. Or they were raised by people that had been in Babylon. They spoke Chaldean, so perhaps they gave them that name. Regardless, what we do know is that there's an origin that is not Jerusalem, and it's Babylon specifically. And so anyways, that being said, and you'll see where this is coming across, is that they're leading up to something. Okay, so remember that these prophets are called the what? Anybody? Post-exilic prophets. So it's post-exile, post-70 years. In fact, it tells us the time frame that this is in the 4th year of King Darius. So that means it's been a while then, really, since they were released, that it was given the command for them to go back. And you have the commands of Artaxerxes and Darius and Cyrus, several commands now. So they've been back in Jerusalem for a while, and yet you still have some people that have those Chaldean, those Babylonian names that are there because of where they had been. And so it gives us information. But in verse number 2, you'll notice at the end of verse 2, I'm not going to say the names again, all right? You can correct me on what those are later. But at the end of verse 2 it says, and their men, so these guys, and their men to pray before the Lord. And so they had a few of these guys, you have these two guys and a few other people, and so people that follow, they were told to go to the temple and they're going to pray before the Lord. And so the idea of them sending is that they had a group of people that were sending them this way. Why? Because there's a ritual that's about to be done that they have done for a while, and they're going to go do so. Now, would we all agree that praying is a good thing? Amen. Yes. But can you pray about the wrong things, and can you pray the wrong way? Absolutely. In fact, I'd submit to you that more often than not, most prayers, and I think often, and I say most prayers, I mean generally prayers that we hear or that we're talked about are not full prayers. And I'll make a case for that as far as what I mean in just a little bit, but just to think about that, and I'm just dropping that in there. Look at verse number 3. And so this is what they're sent to do, to pray before the Lord. And to speak unto the priests which were in the house of the Lord of hosts, and to the prophets, saying, should I weep in the 5th month, separating myself as I have done these so many years? And so the question then is, these guys and a group of them, they're getting ready for this ritual that they do, and so they go to the priests and they ask the priests this question. Now I love this because they're getting sent as this group that's getting ready to do a ritual, saying, hey, we have a question, would you guys go ask the priests? So you have these two guys that come up with a group of people, and they're all kind of like pushing, you ask them, yeah, come on, you ask them. Okay, do we need to do this again? What are we talking about? In fact, we said this thing, basically, we've been doing this for a long time. We do this every year at the 5th month of the year. We do this. We're separating ourselves. This would be similar in language to like the language of the Day of Atonement, which they would separate themselves. But this is specifically in the 5th month, which means it's not the Day of Atonement. And it says that should I weep in the 5th month, separating myself as I've done these so many years? The idea of weeping can mean a couple of things, in my opinion. And again, when I say my opinion, that means I could be wrong. But when it comes to the idea of weeping, either it's something that is so overbearing, like to do this again, like I'm going to have this drudgery of doing this, or the other part is I'm weeping because that's kind of part of the ceremony, kind of part of the tradition that we're going to wail and we're going to just lament. We're going to bring out this emotional exercise that we do once a year on the 5th month, and we've been doing this every year. Do we have to do this again? And it's an honest question. So anyways, they're coming specifically to the priests, though. You notice that? Now, this is important because later on Zechariah is going to answer, but the priests are the ones that are asked this question. Now, so what you have starting at number 1 is the people ask. Simple question. Hey, do we need to do this again? Specifically, what they're talking about is this time that's taken, the 5th month. In fact, you'll see this in verse number 5, what they're talking about, speaking to all the people of the land and to the priests, saying, when ye fasted and mourned in the 5th and 7th month, even those 70 years. In other words, this is a fast or a mourning or a commemoration that would take place every single year in the 5th month for 70 years, and he references those 70 years. In other words, this is something that you did during that time of captivity, during the time of exile. In chapter number 8, he's going to address it similarly. In fact, he's going to give more months that you did. You did the 5th and the 7th, and multiple months that you had several feasts or several fastings, several commemorations during those times. And so you are commemorating something. Now, what we do know about this has to do with the and I'm going off memory here, but I believe it has to do with the burning down of the temple, specifically on the 5th month. Now, it could be the exile itself. Remember, Jerusalem, was taken in multiple goes. It wasn't just one and done. You have several invasions of Jerusalem where Nebuchadnezzar comes in and he just destroys a place. They steal stuff out of the temple. They steal people, but it comes in about 3 waves. And apparently, there's about 3 of these commemorations that are taking place, and you'll find it in other passages that tell you the specific months. Try to memorize them, and I forgot, so forgive me. And anyways, this is what's going on. Now, this is not far off, by the way, right? Because we do that, don't we? For instance, September 11th, there's going to be something again this year, because there's something every year. And by the way, is that a bad thing that people remember? Well, a lot of people died, right? And so it's very sad, very tragic. We think about our nation, and people love our nation. We think that these are our neighbors, whether you like them, love them, or hate them. They're near you, and it's tragic if there's an attack on our neighbors. And so the country commemorates the World Trade Center crashing down. So that takes place, and the attack that was there on our soil, and of course what took place in Pennsylvania and in Washington, D.C. So there's those commemorations that are made. This year is going to commemorate December 7th of this year will be 70 years of what? Anybody remember? Oh, does anybody remember? Okay, so anyways, I don't remember. Obviously, that was a long time ago, but some people in our church may have more direct knowledge on that one. And anyways, so it's 70 years, and so there's going to be a bigger commemoration of that. In fact, where Pearl Harbor is, you have the USS Arizona, where you can go out there and view it. Perhaps some of you have seen it, and you can see it underwater because of how many people died in the attack that took place on U.S. soil. That's one of those things that's done. And anyways, it would be a long time. Now, 70 years is a long time to be repeating that. Some people can say, like, oh, that happened so long ago. But you notice something is that future generations don't think about it as much. For instance, I saw something in Ethiopia. Now, not that I was there, but I saw a video where people that had fought the Italians. I don't know if you know this, but Italy invaded Ethiopia twice. And under Benito Mussolini, they invaded back in the, I'm trying to remember, late 1930s or early 1940s. They invaded just, I guess 1940s, late 1930s. Some were right there, the transition, where they invaded is kind of a precursor to World War II. And they tried taking Ethiopia, and they did, and a lot of American people and Haitians and Jamaicans, they sent basically a lot of people and money and Haile Selassie and all that. They went and took over again, and it was really a lot. But I remember watching the video, and this video is just from a couple years ago, and some of the veterans that were there just weeping, just absolutely torn apart, because you have people going in that are truly unarmed, like some of them truly unarmed. You have time, in fact, the first time Italy invaded at the end of the 1800s, they're going back and they're fighting the Italians with spears and with sabers and like the machetes. That's what they're fighting against, and they held off the Italians, by the way, that first time. And so anyways, a lot of those things that are going on, they're just weeping because of how much they lost. Same thing with our World War II vets, and just weeping over something that took place a long time ago. But you know what? I've never seen a millennial stand there and just bawl their eyes out. Now, not that it hasn't happened, but it's different, isn't it? Because it's not a battle that we necessarily fought, and so it's a battle our forefathers fought, and so it's different. Now, in this case, it's kind of like that, where there's a time of separation. But the other part is that it wasn't just to commemorate, but it's specifically what they were sent to do, is that they were sent to pray. They're supposed to weep and mourn something. God allowed the burning of the temple, the invasion of Judah, the invasion of Jerusalem, the capturing away, the taking away of people. And so there's a mourning there, but also a prayer for the rebuilding of the temple. So what happens when you're mourning? And part of this is a time of mourning, perhaps a time of sober reflection. Maybe some of the survivors talked about it, and they told the stories, and they brought you to tears in those times of crying out unto God. And finally, they build the foundation, a few chapters, or I guess a different book altogether. But regardless, when they built it, they construct this in the book of Ezra, and it talks about the old men, the ancient men that wept and cheered, and it was there that they were doing this. And now these guys are saying, wait a second, do we have to do this again? I mean, do we still have to be so broken? Do I have to weep again for this? It's a very emotional time. Why would they be questioning that? Because they've already built the temple. Or they've gotten started on this, like, we're here, we're already going to do this. And in fact, they've been given courage in the first 6 chapters, like, go do it. Jesus is coming, everything is going to be great, and there's going to be challenges, but just do it, and I'm going to empower you to do what you're supposed to. And all those things happening, that ask the question, wait a second, so we have the foundation, we're getting started, things are going well. Do we still have to have this commemoration every year? It's a fast, by the way, and the fast is a very religious thing, isn't it? Some people fast for different reasons. I know you think about the like hunger strikes. Right now, there's a guy in Russia, at least as of last Wednesday, there was a guy in Russia who was opposing the Russians, and so they incarcerated him and because he was a big anti-communist, and so they threw him in jail, and he did a hunger strike, and that's a fast. He's saying, all right, we're not for what's going on, so he's fasting. And there's fears, by the way, because of his poor health, he might die. He's not eating because he wants Russia to be liberated from the hands of communism, and so anyways, that's what's going on there. Now, would you say that's the spiritual fast? No. Is that a prescribed fast from the Scriptures? No. Is that coming with a lot of prayers? And because he called them to go flood the churches and pray at the altars and weep and seek God's face? No, none of that. But it's a fast. Gandhi was famous for his long fast. I can't remember how long he did it, but it was a long time. And they thought he was going to die. He almost did die. But he fasted. In fact, right now, you can go online right now and talk about the health fast, that people will fast long periods of time for health, and it has nothing to do with anything spiritual. Now, is there anything wrong with fasting? Not at all. In fact, sometimes a doctor may encourage a fast for different reasons. But this is something that's supposed to be a religious thing. The word religion, by the way, is an interesting term, because the term religion, you notice it starts with the the concept of that is a repetitive thing. The term religion is not necessarily a bad thing. In fact, the book of James talks about it in chapter number 1, talking about pure religion and undefiled. What are the two things, pure religion and undefiled? What do they do? Visit the widows and the orphans, the fatherless, right, is what the Bible tells us. And so the concept of that is religion is that this repetitive action is something that you continue in. And so this is something that should be done. Unfortunately, for an unbeliever, they would do these repetitive actions hoping to gain some favor with God, whereas believers ought to have these repetitive actions again. And so what we have then is some things that we form as traditions, some things that we do always because we've always done them, and it's just kind of the way we do things as Christians. Do we have that here in our country? Do we have that at Charity Baptist Church? Yes. Yes, we do. Is it a bad thing? It could be, but not necessarily. For instance, let me ask you, have you ever sang a hymn and you notice like you kind of got lost at how many verses you were in, but you sang the whole entire time? You ever done that? I've done that before. And we've gone through and like, we haven't been singing the song for like half an hour or something like that, and you've been singing all the words, but you haven't paid attention to any of it. And there are times where because you've done it, and it's powerful, and I've had times where and honestly, I work to when I sing, to go through the words and pay attention to the words, and we pick hymns that I'm thinking about, and as we're going through these things, we're thinking about the words, and there's sometimes like hymns that I've sang literally hundreds of times, never noticed what the words said. And so we have these things that we've done just because we've done them for a long time. And how long have we done them? Well, our oldest songs in our American Christianity is about 400 years old, because about how long our language has been around as far as the way we speak it. And if we had been older, we'd have older songs. In fact, you have hymns that go back to the 3rd and 4th century that are still sang in other parts of the world. Pretty great. They just don't transliterate to English very well. So we don't sing those. But likewise, generations, thousands of years, people have been singing these same words, and how many times do we not think about them? It's this ritual. It's this tradition. It's religion. You're repeatedly doing something for the Lord. We come to church Sunday mindlessly, and I'll do this the same way, where mindlessly I get up on a Sunday morning early with the expectation of going to church, and I didn't think by great conviction, praise God, I'm waking up today at 5 a.m. because I want to go serve God. You know what I do? I wake up at 5 a.m. and I wake a couple minutes before I'm awake. All right, so I wake up, but I'm not awake. And then I get to thinking about it for a little while, and I go and sit for a while. I'll go sit at my desk, and I just kind of stare at nothing for a little while until I'm awake. I might go make coffee. Here's a little secret. Sometimes I eat ice cream on Sunday mornings. All right, so if you're wondering if I'm fasting, your pastor's fasting on Sunday morning, ice cream wakes me up. All right, and it's also the other time that my kids are asleep, and so I don't have to share it. So anyways, but that's what takes place. But it's ritual. I'll go through these things, and it's ritual, but I'm doing it for the Lord. And I'm not saying it's a bad thing, but it sure can be a bad thing. And so this is the question. Is it okay? Should we continue to do this? And this is what they're getting at. Now, they're having these feasts. I'm sorry, not these feasts, but these commemorations that are times of fastings and prayers and mourning. They're doing these things. And so they go and ask the priest. But notice what it says in verse 4. Then came the word of the Lord of hosts unto me. Who is who? Who's the me in that verse? Zechariah. Is Zechariah the priest? No, he's the prophet. He's not the priest. And so they ask the priest, and Zechariah's like, hang on a second. God just said something. All right, so verse number 5, speak unto all the people of the land and to the priests. So not just those groups of people, but speak unto all the people of the land and to the priests who are supposed to be asking these questions. Now, I believe that verses 1 through 3, they have the question, should we keep doing this? I believe the answer was yes from the priests. I believe that. Because Zechariah says, or God tells Zechariah to answer the priests and all the people, which means he had to correct the priests as well, because I believe that the priests would have had a yes answer. Should we do this? Absolutely. And by the way, aren't you going to continue to push the things that you're committed to doing? Like, we're here, aren't we? We've already set the money aside. We've already spent the money. We've got the spread. We've got the decorations up. All these priests have shown up to do this thing. And now you're wondering whether or not we should do this? Duh, of course this is the thing to do. And we've always done this. Amen? We should. So what happens in this one? God interjects. God interjects here. And here's what he tells them. Go down to verse 4, verse 5, right in the middle. When ye fasted and mourned in the 5th and 7th month. So here's what God says. When you guys, priests and all the people, when you fasted and mourned in the 5th and 7th month, from chapter number 8, we see it's also in the 4th month, in verse number 19, and in the 7th month and the 10th month. So they had a lot of months of these things. And all these bad things that have happened, they keep thinking about and mourning about. But when they did this, fasted and mourned in the 5th and 7th month, even those 70 years, did ye at all fast unto me, even to me, all right, especially to me. Think about this. Was this something specifically done for me, or was it not? So he re-asks the questions, kind of a Socratic method of teaching, isn't it? Gets you to think about it. What he tells them, they're coming, do I need to do this? And so God says, wait a second, let's reframe the question. The question is, did you, when you fast and mourn, did you fast and mourn to me, even, especially, specifically to me? Well, of course. Didn't we sing to God just a moment ago, and we sang about his great power and his might, the shelter that he is? And yes, we sang, aren't they to God? Didn't we dress up to come to church? Didn't we do all these things for God? Of course it's to God. And in this, he's saying we fasted and we mourned. We fasted. This is a very prayerful and important time. Surely this prayer and fasting is to God. But I believe oftentimes it's not. In fact, think about it. Our Congress is opened in prayer all the time. And when they come, there's instructions, like they don't want you to say certain things like in Jesus' name, and they don't want you to, like just go off the cuff. You have to have a pre-written prayer that you go and has to be proved when you go and pray. And anyways, you pray, and they'll pray, and you don't have to pray with your eyes closed, but it's going to be a read prayer. And is there anything wrong with the read prayer? Not technically. There's not technically anything wrong with the read prayer. But what's important to note is that it's prayed for the purpose of the hearers. And by the way, if it's for the purpose, isn't all prayers designed for the purpose of the hearer, which should be God, but that prayer is for the purpose of the hearers, which are the people. That's what it's designed. That's why Congress brings people in. I don't think it was intentionally designed to be that way, but that's what it's become, and it's been very obvious. One of the reasons we know that is because they come in, they're going to... I haven't even preached about the a man or a woman thing, but they did that for the sake of everybody that's hearing, because it's not to God. And God can say, is that prayer for me? Talking to me? No, not really. But I'm doing all these things that God, surely you're happy with. And the answer is no, not really. Why do we know that? Because he's asking them the heart of the matter. And so if we look at the context of what's been going on, you have instructions. You're going to build this thing. I'm instructing you. I'm going to empower you. Jesus is coming. We're going to bring them in. We're going to reach the world. And then in chapter number 7, now the question is now what? All right, so here's the deal. The heart needs to be taken care of right now. And what he does here is when they ask, okay, now we're going to do these things. Do we have to keep living in the past? Isn't it time to move on, to build this temple and live for Jesus? Yes, but here's the problem. When you were doing those things, this mourning and fasting, it really wasn't even for God in the first place. Look at verse 6. And when ye did eat and when ye did drink, did not ye eat for yourselves and drink for yourselves? Let me ask you, when you celebrate the birth of Jesus Christ, how often do you go to cut your ham or whatever you eat on Christmas, and you think, I'm going to celebrate Jesus by eating this ham and all the fixings with it. This is for the glory of God. The truth is we oftentimes don't, do we? Are we celebrating that? How about Thanksgiving, a holiday that is designed, which honestly is one of the most spiritual, scripturally holidays. Like, it's a good idea. It's a good idea to have a holiday that says, God, thank you. Thank you, God. Because this literally, what's a declared purpose of that holiday is to thank our Creator for what he's given us. That's a good holiday. But how often when we're sitting there and we're arguing around the table about politics and about world events and about sports and stuff, how much are we like, God, thank you, this morsel of food is so good, that dry bread, whoever made that, don't they know nutmeg doesn't go in that stuff? And are we thankful? No, here's what happens. You did, according to verse number 6, you did eat and you did drink. Did ye not eat for yourselves and drink for yourselves? Oh, yes, I had 3 rounds because that would give God the most glory. All right, the more the berry. Oftentimes we don't. What I'm saying is this is not that far off. This translates to us today. And so verse number 7, should ye not hear the words? In other words, this is what you should be doing. You should ye not hear the words which the Lord hath cried by the former prophets when Jerusalem was inhabited and in prosperity, and the cities thereof round about her when men inhabited the south and the plain. In other words, back when Jerusalem and in Judah and Israel and all those, whenever things were going well there, and they were just going right, and they were there, but they weren't spiritually the way they were supposed to, God cried. Now, the term cry doesn't mean that he was weeping in the corner. The idea, he let out with some kind of desperation is the idea. And he's making this plea, this desperate plea to them. And how do you do that? By, according to this verse, by the prophets. Things were going fine, and I tried warning you. And things were going well, and I warned you, and I was gracious. But then when you got carried away, what did you do? Well, you started mourning, you started fasting, so you had these religious events, these things that you were doing. But the problem was you just still didn't listen to the prophets. Now you're just like, God, I need this stuff. So it all became, God, I want, and you're not listening to me. And what he's saying here is, you have all these things you're doing, and you're still not listening to me. You want what you want. Continuing on. So that's the answer from the prophet, and then you have the answer from God himself in verse number 8, which I guess verse number 5 and verse number 8 is kind of similar. They're both from the Lord. Verse 8, and the word of the Lord came unto Zechariah, saying, Thus speaketh the Lord of hosts, saying, Execute true judgment, and show mercy and compassions every man to his brother, and oppress not the widow, nor the fatherless, the stranger, nor the poor, and let none of you imagine evil against his brother in your heart. But they refused to hearken, and pulled away the shoulder, and stopped their ears, that they should not hear. Yea, they made their hearts as an adamant stone, lest they should hear the law, and the words which the Lord of hosts hath sent in his spirit by the former prophets. Therefore came a great wrath from the Lord of hosts. They received wrath. That's what they got. Now, notice what he's pointing out here is that they were warned. He said, listen, I loved you, and you had it good, but then you didn't listen to me. Now, back then, because of that, you experienced the wrath of God. That's what you got, and that's what he called it. Right? It's pretty brutal. Now, you experienced that, the great destruction that occurred. This is what took place. Why? Because you didn't live in the simplicity of what you were supposed to do. What was the issues? Now, 2 Chronicles talks about the land, talks about the idolatry, but then in this one, he talks about something else. Now, this is interesting that he would mention this. Why doesn't he mention idolatry, and why doesn't he why doesn't he mention the Sabbath rest for the land, which they got kicked out for? Now, think about it. If they're in Babylon, is it practical to be like, well, you're not giving the land Sabbath rest? God's saying, I'll take care of that for you. I'm going to kick you out and make sure the land gets Sabbath rest. So he's taking care of that one. What about the idolatry? Well, they're in Babylon, so it's not like they're not worshiping properly at the temple and committing those things. And so he's addressing something else. He's saying, you guys are still living with more of your brethren, and amongst your brethren, you're still not acting the way you're supposed to. This is the simplicity of it. What does he tell them? He gives them a list in verse number, which we'll read it again, but verse number 9, execute true judgment. The idea of true judgment is actually kind of the idea of scales, and so the idea is being honest about your dealings with your brethren. And so this is a part of it. You should be honest with your dealings with your brother. Be true about it. Now, this could convey financial dealings, which I think seems to be very obvious in this one, but it also, I believe, can be with the way in which we treat people, like making determinations between people that will favor one and will be willing to lie and insert some falsehoods in there. The picture there of a true judgment would be some weights or balances that are not exact. For instance, something that you would put on a scale, and you're buying let's just say 5 pounds of grain, and so on the other side, you would put a weight that's 5 pounds, and then you put a bag of grain that's 5 pounds. As soon as they balanced out, that's how you know it. Sometimes my wife and I will buy seafood, and they weigh it that same way. They'll put it on a scale, and I'll say, hey, I want 10 pounds of shrimp, or some kind of dream like that. That would be wonderful. But anyways, we would in the South, we would, because it was cheaper. Here, it's a fortune. And anyways, so we would do that. And anyways, they would put some more on there and more on there in the scale. And sometimes I think, well, wait a second, that's less than the last time I bought 5 pounds here. And this is more than All right, it looks like I got a good deal this time. Well, I don't know. If we just trust the scale right, an idea would be that the scales are slightly off in favor of the person that owns the scales or the weights, right? This would be the same idea that we're not being just, we're ripping people off, we're still about excess and gain and greed, and this is what they're doing even in Babylon. You're exiled, and you should be learning better, and you're still not honest with the way you live with people, with your own brethren specifically. He says, show mercy. As believers, this is something that Christians are instructed to do, is to show mercy. Even in the greeting that Paul gives multiple times, he says grace, peace, and the third one that's oftentimes mentioned is mercy. Not all the times, but it's those three things, grace, peace, and mercy, that are mentioned within the greetings. This is a symbolic gesture, but not only that, this should be the way we're living our lives, with mercy towards other people. We're given several instructions in the scriptures as far as how we are supposed to conduct ourselves, always with mercy. Here's what it's pointing out. I love that he's instructed us this way, because sometimes we're done wrong. What if somebody treats you with unjust or untrue judgment? You respond to them in mercy instead of vindication of some kind or revenge or whatever. He says mercy. That's a symbol there in regards to, or some kind of gesture that is it's important that it represents Christianity or believers. The children of God ought to conduct themselves in a way they show mercy and compassion. This is to every man to his brother. This should be something for all of us. Well, certain people should, judges should. Every man to his brother ought to be conducting themselves the same way. Oppress not the widow, nor the fatherless, nor the stranger. The James 1 example that we talked about, true religion, the things we're doing to visit the fatherless and the widow. The idea is we take care of needs. This should be there. One of the things that irritates me is press conferences when somebody's going to give a charitable donation. A wealthy person wants to gather all the media. I'm going to give $1 million to this thing. Who cares? Just give it. Just give it. Oh, it's because I want people to know how much I love everybody and how good of a company Facebook is. I mean, whatever. Whatever it may be. We just want people to know, listen, that's nonsense. You know what it should be? We should be very glad to slip in that $50 bill to that widow that needs it. Nobody needs to know about it. And if it does, it's only because there's no other need. You don't have to advertise, hey, guess what? I helped 5 people this week with food. Or I was so glad I was able to buy this pair of shoes for this little. Listen, it's one of those things that this is one of the characters of the children of God, that we are generous. We are loving, we are merciful, we are true, we are honest, and we take care of those that are less fortunate. The idea of widows and fatherless is similar nowadays, but even more back then in the sense that they were really helpless. A widow who oftentimes would lack the financial means because her husband has died, who was once the breadwinner. Not that the women didn't work. Women were working in many occasions. You find it, for instance, Proverbs 31. But you have to remember, they're also taking care of children, and during that time period, they weren't just putting them in child care. They took care of them. So going to work, that was challenging. So you're doing all these things. This is different, right? And so anyways, what's taking place is they're vulnerable. You have people like Ruth that go out and get food, but what if she had a child? That would have made things very difficult to go out and get food, even if she needed it. And so if that's the case, don't take advantage of the people who are needy. Do you help them out? The widow, the fatherless, the stranger. The stranger would be the foreigner. The person that's not one of us. We would take care of them. That for us as Christians today, we would say unbelievers, okay? So that's kind of the better example for how we would use it. Well, they're not Christians, so we're not going to treat them as well. No, likewise, the same kindness and love that we would demonstrate to other believers. And he says in verse 10, and let none of you imagine evil against his brother in your heart. So now he's going even to not just the things that you're doing, but a step further, that even what you're thinking about towards other people, the idea of evil, any harm towards another individual, don't think any of those things at all whatsoever towards your brother. And so what he does is he gives you this list. He's saying Christians, and for them, he's saying you guys ought to not have any of those things. This is what I wanted from you. And you're going through this ritual, you're going through fasting, you're going through mourning. God, we want these things for your glory. Would you not construct your temple again? Would you not use us? Would you not liberate us? Would you bring, and once again, for your glory. And we're mourning for the great God, whose name is stained throughout all the world, and the heathen are mocking. And God is saying, you're still not listening. The prophets have preached. And by the way, all these things in the prophets, the minor prophets especially, before the exile, they preached heavily. He spent chapters explaining the way that you should not be taking advantage of strangers, even addressing taking advantage of people that would be slaves to you. Those are things that should not be present, and yet he's saying you're still not listening. And you want, and you ask, and you ask. And what's happening is you're missing what you could. And so as he's answering, What he's pointing out is, do you need this fast? Well, you're not even asking that question. You think this fast is doing something good, but really it's empty. It's empty religion. It's not true religion. The outward worship is inconsistent. You're not following this list of things. You're not living for me, and these are some examples of why. And so as he brings up these Old Testament examples, he gives us something that I love the way he uses the terminology. In verse number 11, it says, "But they refused to hearken, even in exile, in other words, and pulled away the shoulder and stopped their ears that they should not hear." So he gives three things. All right, I warned you, and in other words, you listened, but you didn't really pay attention. You kind of just kept going, okay, whatever. Nice sermon. No, that's very convicting. Okay, moving on, didn't listen. The next one is you pulled away. In other words, John, if I can borrow you really quick here. If I'm telling John that I'm warning him, listen, if you will walk to that way, if you'll stand over here real quick, and he's walking that way, and I say, John, don't go over there. And he would just nod, okay, yeah, and then he turns over that way. And then I grab him by the shoulder, and then here's what he does. He pulls away his shoulder because he's walking that way. So see what he's done? He's pulled away because I'm trying to, wait. I've warned him, and I've tried grabbing his shoulder. He pulled his shoulder away to keep going. And then once again, so he just go ahead and keep going. And then he keeps going as if nothing had happened in ceremony. And so this is the picture in the note. Go ahead and be seated. Thank you for that. Just the shoulder pulling away is what I wanted you to see. And then stop their ears. And so I guess the other one would have been that he listened. Okay, he pulled his shoulders. I tried warning them. And as he's walking towards it, you would have done this as well. Covered his ears. So not only were you not willing to do what I told you when you heard it, then you pulled away when I really tried getting after you. And then as I'm yelling at you as you're going further, and then you covered your ears. And then you're wondering why I didn't give you what you wanted. And what he's pointing out here is that your spiritual life matters. In other words, this isn't for the sake of us just having this mighty nation, where you can have this great, great empire where everything is great and everybody's so afraid of Israel and how powerful they are, and all the nations come to us and yes, we're the mightiest and the best. Here's what he's saying. What matters is your walk with God. That's what he's pointing out. And so what he explains then in the next verse, in verse number 12, yea, they made their hearts as an adamant stone. I struggled, by the way, with this one. What in the world is an adamant stone? So I looked up, what is an adamant stone? And I couldn't find anything. And so Google says it's a mythical stone. I kept on looking at some of the other usages in the past. Some of the writings during this time would reference stone that were very similar to diamonds. So we say, oh, John, with your refusal to listen, you've got a heart of a diamond. By the way, it's a bad thing because God doesn't want you to have a rock-hard, diamond-strong stone. The idea has to do with reception. You see, diamonds are very, very strong, very strong. In fact, for a long time, they were considered indestructible or adamant. There's the word. And so the idea is they were so strong, they would be used to cut things that would seem to be uncuttable. In fact, for many years, people considered diamonds to be the hardest stone out there. And so with that, what he's saying is your hearts are like diamonds. People are like, oh, of course, well, I am diamond. Yes, and here's what he's saying. Your heart is so hard, it's not movable at all. Your heart is so hard that you cannot be softened at all towards the things of God. And he's saying, I've warned you, and the longer that you say no, and you notice what the progression was. He didn't do it. He turned his shoulder away. He covered his ears. And as he's progressing, he's saying, your heart's getting harder. Doesn't the New Testament warn us about the same thing? He describes this as the hardening of a heart. Believers, by the way. And so what he's pointing out to us is those of us, and if you've been in church a long time, you'll find that your hearts can get hardened. How does that happen, by the way? It's not because you've heard it too much. I remember hearing about Christian schools, kids, and I remember in college, Aaron, you probably have a bunch of Christian school students that are with you, and I don't know if it's still the same way, but I remember when I was in college at Pensacola, there was a way that if we saw certain people that were like rebellious, and not just rebellious, but they were like cool rebellious. Not so much they were cool, they thought they were really cool. They were hot stuff. So I went to what's considered a really large Christian college. But my dad went to Berkeley of 50,000 people. My college was 4,700 people, okay? So in our world, yes, we were enormous. The truth is it wasn't that big of a school. And anyways, that being said, we had Christian schoolers who had a chip on their shoulder of anything to do with anything spiritual. Kind of like they knew it all. We go to Bible classes, they knew everything. And some of them were great, by the way. Some of them godly people. Some of them were just really wonderful. And some of them was like, they don't want anything to do with God. I'm like, how in the world? But yet we go to prayer meeting, and they can pray, man. They can pray heaven down with the words that they would say, and the weeping, and the mourning, and the fasting, and the Bible reading, and the knowledge. Sounds familiar, doesn't it? And I used to hear something that was said, and I heard it for a long time, that it was dangerous to hear that much preaching. Why? Because in Christian school, they grow up, and they heard preaching Sunday morning, Sunday night, Wednesday night, and then chapel, sometimes a couple chapels a week. And they go to Christian camp, and they heard more preaching. You're hearing hundreds of messages a week. And so they say that the danger was hearing too much preaching. But can I honestly tell you what the problem is and is prescribed in this passage? The problem was that they didn't hearken. But here's what it means. They didn't do. James chapter 1, but be doers of the word, not hearers only, deceiving your own selves. The deception that's bred into this. When you say you get instruction from the word of God and you don't hearken. The word hearken doesn't mean you didn't hear it, but you didn't do it. You weren't a doer of the word. When you didn't do it, then there had to be some greater efforts taken. That's when God sends the preachers that just grab a hold of your shoulder and try to bring you back, and you pull away. It's a little bit more intentional now. And then finally, as you're headlong, you're saying, no, I refuse. Yes, I acknowledge those things of God. Yes, I'm willing to fast. I'm going to keep the celebration. I'm going to put up a Christmas tree and give gifts and praise God and amen and open my hymn book and dress nice and comb my hair the way it's supposed to be. But in our godliness, now we don't even want to listen to those instructions. Well, we know all those things. I don't want to listen to that. We block our ears. In other words, becoming more and more and more intentional until the point where God says, finally, all right, I'm done. In fact, to show you how much done he is, look how it finishes it off. It talks about the great wrath. Verse 13, therefore it is come to pass that as he cried, so who's the he on this one? It's God. So it's come to pass as God cried, and they would not hear, so they cried, and I would not hear, saith the Lord of hosts. And catch the picture. In fact, this is in fact, let me just read verse 14 to finish the text. But I scattered them with a whirlwind among all the nations whom they knew not. Thus the Lord was desolate after them, that no man passed through, no returned, for they laid the pleasant land desolate. Listen, this is what it cost. It was destruction for the land. By the way, at this point, he said, I brought you back. Don't do this again. This what matters is your spirituality. And you're saying, I want more rituals. Do we need to do these rituals? And what do we need to do now? Or should we do something else? And he's saying, look, it's your heart. This is what matters. And so the problem is, here's what he said, though. I cried, and they didn't listen. And so then when they cried, I didn't listen. Here's what he's saying. They were saying, God, please. And what this means is that for 70 years you fasted and mourned, and you said, please, God. And there was times like, God didn't care. God didn't listen. 400 years where the children of Israel the lands they were supposed to be in the promised land. They had to go through time in Egypt, and all that took place there. God, please. Does God even care? He's saying it's your heart. It's not about how well you can ask and how much you can ask. It's your heart. You're not in a place where you can receive the blessing. You're not obeying me, so I can't make you listen. I realize that I use a lot of illustrations with my children, and they're good kids, I promise you that. But this one really hit me yesterday as I was putting my son to bed. Now, he's 3, okay, so I'm not saying it's excusable, but it's a good illustration, so I feel this is important. Let's just say it's another kid, okay, so this happens. So a child is disobeying. Children disobey, right? We're not unique, I think, in that one. Children disobey. And they'll say no, and I don't want that. I don't want to listen. In fact, they'll ignore. I didn't hear. And then you would get to the point where like trying to grab them, right, to try to get them. They still take off running. And then they're like, really, like, I'm not going to pay attention. And they just kind of shut down on doing what they want. But then they want something. My son yesterday was like, okay, you did something bad. This is not okay. But he just like, okay, well, I'm going to do it anyways. So he just does it, disobeys. And I said, okay, you need to come over here. No, so I literally went to go grab him, and he took off running and said, okay, now we got to go to bed. And you're not going to listen to what's going on. And it was like 9:30, and so we were like, we're done for the night. All right, so you're laying down here. And then he says, but Daddy, can I have? And he started asking me for something. And I said, well, wait a second. And I remember telling him, I'm trying to teach them this. And honestly, much of my parenting, I look at the way God treats his people, and I'm thinking, okay, I'm trying to learn here, God. As I'm telling them these things, I'm saying, look, you don't want to do what I want, but then you're going to cry to me, and you're desperate. And he's desperate. He saw this toy at Walmart he wanted. He just wanted it so bad. And I said, no, you cannot disobey and then get what you want. Now, we see that with children, right? And you hear what I'm going with the illustration? This is what God's telling them. You disobey, but if you think you have enough ceremony, you come to church the right way, you have certain things that you are doing right, then you can get what you want. And God is saying, no. Because of that, I couldn't even listen to your prayers. You know, you look at the heart of God and the things that he wanted to do. Even Jesus tells the Pharisees at any time, Matthew 23, said, at any time I would have gathered you up. I would have. But you wouldn't. You wouldn't. And this is the whole point in this. He said, it's your heart. Listen, I'm going to do this, but I want your heart. I want your heart. My son will one day grow up to serve the Lord. That's my goal. That's what my desire is. And there's a battle that didn't go well for me yesterday. He did well with, and he's pretty strong, I guess, in some ways. But the reality is he lost a blessing. He didn't get to be home. I mean, he was home, but he didn't get to enjoy our home. He didn't get to enjoy daddy and sisters and mama and what we were doing. He had to be separated from that. So this is what God is saying. Listen and obey. And be very careful for the hard heart. Be very careful that your tradition doesn't begin to rule your relationship with God. This is what God's wanting you to do. He wants your heart. Let's pray. Lord, I thank you so much for the time you've given.